Welcome to ISP's A to Z speaker series, where we speak to leading experts to explore future careers and equip you with tools so that you can have meaningful conversations with your children about their futures. Today I'm at the University College Dublin in Ireland with the Vice Principal International for the College of Health and Agricultural Sciences, Africa O'Sullivan. Thank you for having me on campus.
Thank you for coming to campus, and I hope you've had time to explore the campus a little bit and get to see the different buildings and what we have here.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's a very broad campus and very impressive. Okay, so looking at your area of specialism now, so growing a sustainable and healthy world. Can you elaborate a little bit about this?
Sure. So I suppose my own background is human nutrition, and I'm based in the School of Agriculture and Food Science. So I'm an associate professor in human nutrition in the School of Agriculture and Food Science, and got into this area of sustainable food and sustainable health because I suppose we have to think about the world today, and it's certainly under pressure from an environmental perspective. So there's a lot happening. We've got land shortages, we've got water shortages, and we have climate change happening all together. Agriculture and food are one element of that both contribute to the pressure that we're putting on the world, but also one where we need land and water in order to produce food. And ultimately, we all do need to eat, and we need to eat healthy foods. And so we're living in this environment where we need to start to adapt. And there's a lot to do, I suppose, to kind of get to a more sustainable agriculture and food production system. And so that's kind of where this whole area of sustainable food systems has grown from.
Gosh, okay, so a lot of challenges in the sector here already. And we quite often hear references to food systems and references to agricultural sciences. Are they interchangeable? What's the difference between both?
I guess some people might use them interchangeably, but ultimately I suppose the food system describes everything. So agriculture will be just one component of a food system. So our food system really starts at the soil level, where we would produce foods or have animals grazing on land. So we have food production, which is the first element of it. And then from there we have food processing, we have food manufacturing. Within that, you'll also have new product development, so we'd be looking for how to change the composition of foods to make them more healthy, for example. And then on the upper end of it, you would also have food distribution chains, and then also consumers eating the foods and the impact that that will have on their nutrition and their health. So food systems covers everything, and it really does actually kind of cover all of the elements of the disciplines that we have in the School of Agriculture and Food Science.
Okay, so thank you for the comprehensive answer on that as well. You touched upon some of the traditional roles within kind of food systems. Are there any kind of non-traditional roles that people might not be aware of in this area?
I guess, well, of course, I think there's loads of different roles, and because the food system covers such a broad range of kind of areas and therefore career paths, there's a lot of different types of careers that people will follow that others would not be aware of. I think even looking at the kind of where our own graduates go from our programs, kind of gives you the spectrum. So we would have graduates who are CEOs of international food companies like Kerry Group or Glanbia. We have graduates who are in government roles, so either in Irish government in the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, or even at European level who are members of European Parliament and the European Commission. And then you've got the more technical roles, like those who are involved in maybe new product development in food companies or responsible for sustainability in food companies. There's a huge range of roles that our graduates go into.
Yeah, and that is impressive. Tell us a little bit more about maybe the future trends in these roles. You know, you mentioned a lot of challenges that we're facing now as it stands. So what will be the future challenges, and what kind of career roles will there be in 10, 20 years within food systems?
Well, I guess just to talk to the challenges initially, like again, depending on what aspect of the food system you look to, you're going to have different challenges. So at the food production level, one kind of aspect of climate change, or one metric that we use to measure the impact that agriculture and food has with respect to climate change is greenhouse gas emissions. And so ultimately we need to achieve a net zero of greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 in order to be sustainable and to continue. And so when we look at food production, some foods have more greenhouse gas emissions associated with them when we produce them, so particularly animal source foods. So things like meat and dairy will be slightly higher in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions relative to plant foods like beans, peas, lentils, or some whole grains. And so at the food production level, we need to look at, well, number one, how can we produce foods and reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions associated with them, or change the combination of foods that we're producing. At the same time, we want to maintain biodiversity in farming systems, so that's another element of a more sustainable system. And that continues on. At the food manufacturing level, same thing. So you need technologies where we can actually produce foods or process foods more energy efficiently and with less greenhouse gas emissions. And then up at the other end of the scale, you're all of a sudden asking consumers to maybe reduce the amount of animal source foods that they're eating and introduce new foods into their diets. And that can have implications for the nutrients that they're eating and then also their health. And so you need to have, I suppose, health professionals who are aware of kind of those issues or potential issues, but still being able to support the consumer through that kind of behavior change process to get to the healthy, more sustainable diet as well. So there's a huge range of roles that come alongside the kind of food system, and a huge range of career paths that can therefore come out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking back at your background, I believe you've come from a nutritionist background, is that correct?
That's correct, yes. And I guess, I mean, I wasn't always doing work or research in the area of sustainability. About 10 years ago, actually, I was doing a lot more international nutrition and looking at food and nutrition security in kind of lower income countries, and looking to see kind of what farming practices actually were working best to support nutrition and health for children under 5. That was kind of my focus. And then kind of over the past 5 or 10 years, this issue of sustainability has crept more and more into kind of our research needs and into academia. And so because I was working in that space where food insecurity was a problem and nutrition insecurity was what we were looking at, it then became, I suppose, there became a need to look at nutrition security for the future in higher income countries as well, like in Ireland or other European countries, for example. And I started to transition more towards this idea of how do we, first of all, create sustainable healthy diets in Ireland initially and now more broadly across Europe, and then how do we implement that and what are the potential health implications for it. So it's kind of been a long trajectory, I suppose, to get to this point, starting off kind of 5-10 years ago when I suppose sustainability from a food and health perspective wasn't as big an issue.
Yeah, and that's, highlights how it is evolving and how it will evolve. You mentioned as well about the need for technology. So obviously there are advances in technology already transforming many industries. So how do kind of artificial intelligence and robotics affect the industry, and how is it evolving the industry as it is today?
Hugely. It's such an important component of, again, and I know I keep going back to this whole spectrum of different sectors within the food system, but I mean, looking at precision agriculture as one example where we're using not just robotics to target particular aspects of crop growing, for example, but also using satellite imagery and data from different sources, combining data from different sources. So this idea of big data and data analytics being another important component of it, and then using the robotics, I suppose, to actually target specific aspects of the crop production process based on what's being learned from the big data. So that's that kind of whole area of precision agriculture, which has really kind of emerged in the past few years. You can say the exact same thing about nutrition. So we have a discipline called precision nutrition, and it's essentially doing the same thing except with people and their health. And so prescribing diets that are kind of more targeted towards the individual based on several measurements and technologies and so on. And so those are just kind of two ends of the spectrum in terms of that whole food system, but examples of where that technology and data becomes really important.
Yeah, of course. And looking maybe more now towards students and the scope of the industry, the areas of specialisms, and if they're interested in sustainability, looking at kind of food systems, what background would you recommend academically?
I would say an interest in science and technology would be a starting point. I think regardless of the programme that students come into in our school and within the college, they'll always have a foundation year to kind of get them up to speed in terms of the natural sciences, maths, for example, and data analysis. And then we build from there in terms of the kind of application of those sciences. And so really, I look at agriculture, food science, human nutrition, sustainable food systems as really an applied science. So I think that's a really good starting point, but you can layer onto that several other types of skills or interests that a student might have. Just having that kind of curiosity, I think, is a really important kind of a skill or a trait to bring to it. And when we're talking about food systems specifically and that sustainability element, just having that kind of critical thinking, creativity, innovation, those are all real key skills as we go forward into, I suppose, a world where careers are evolving, job roles are changing all of the time. It's a really new area, I suppose.
Yeah, and there's an element of adaptability there as well, isn't there? And we're talking about technology. We don't even know what technology is going to offer in 20 years' time.
Exactly.
So would you say that digital literacy is an important skill to kind of develop and hone into quite early as well?
Absolutely, and I think we can see that in students coming into university now. A lot of students will be really up to speed in terms of their digital literacy, but it's a really critical skill, I think, for anybody. And again, just an awareness, I suppose, around like the idea that we can use technologies to help us understand some of the world's challenges a little bit more. And I suppose that's again what we're looking at in that sustainable food systems type of a program.
Yeah, okay. And how can students explore the different opportunities? Are there any particular resources that they can go to understand a bit more about this very broad sector?
Yeah, of course. Well, I think any kind of awareness of the environment and what's happening in the world and how things are changing is a good starting point. And I think students, like in today's world, are kind of much more exposed to that, even in TV, in everything that's happening around the world, you see a lot more of that. But in terms of kind of actually going and seeking more information, there's loads of local programs that happen, and there's loads of kind of government-led initiatives within schools and communities that students can get involved in. I know we have several examples of that here in Ireland, and I'm sure you see that replicated globally. But then also you can look to the likes of the United Nations, who have really nice student resources on their websites, and I'm happy to share some of those with you for some of the students. And others like UNICEF again have really nice resources for kind of getting children and adolescents to start to think about sustainability in their world and the kind of role of the food system. So there's plenty of resources out there to kind of get students a little bit more engaged or thinking a little bit more specifically about food systems and sustainability.
Yeah, okay. And any kind of extracurricular activities that you would suggest? I think you mentioned some local kind of community activities. Are there anything else they can get involved in?
One thing I haven't mentioned is kind of food waste and recycling, and like in every community, I think nowadays there's some element of focus on recycling or reusing products. And so again, I would start to look in their local community to see if there is any initiatives like that happening. For example, if there's a kind of a return scheme for plastics and things like that, which often is the case in different places. But those are just even small examples of contributing to this kind of more sustainable world. And again, also linking back to food production, food waste is a big issue, and looking at home locally to see, you know, how much food waste is in the home, and is there ways to manage that? Should I be reusing leftovers for the next day, or planning my lunch for the next week to see how I can better use the resources that I have at home without wasting? And so there's little things like that everybody can do.
Yeah, we're big fans of litter picking in our family, and we love the tools that you can use. But it's all about awareness, isn't it? And being aware of you know, the environment and taking care of it initially.
And there's just so, I mean, there's so many opportunities like that. And as I said, even if there wasn't something kind of advertised in the local community, it's actually, you know, take your own kitchen at home and see what could you do better to keep it tidier, or to like that look at the food waste and reuse and things like that. So there's plenty of opportunities.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so looking in particular now at our parents' audience, and you know, in terms of sparking curiosity, you've obviously mentioned some activities for students. You know, how can parents support curiosity and passion in this area?
I think it's again just encouraging that curiosity that I mentioned, and even just talking about foods and kind of talking about nutrition, I suppose, to whatever level is possible in the home, and maybe even looking at things like I think of my own nieces and nephews, and they're all engaged in sports, and looking at, you know, fueling the body from that perspective is one way to start to talk about foods. You know, you need the energy to play, or you need the energy to be involved in particular sports, and you know, where is that energy coming from? And then from there you can work backwards to, okay, well, where is that food produced? And thinking about it a little bit more like that. Having the conversations, I think, with children and students is just the way to kind of start to kind of encourage their own curiosity around it, I suppose, is something that any kind of parent can do.
Yeah, okay, that's fantastic advice. And then hands-on experience. So obviously when they're a bit younger, we can generate conversations and we can support with various activities. When they're a bit older, you know, how can they get hands-on experience of food sustainability in industry, in the community? Do you have any kind of recommendations?
Well, certainly, I mean, at the university level, all of our programs have a work experience element built into them. So that's a mandatory work experience, and we find that really excellent for students. The duration of that depends on the program, but it's usually between kind of 5 and 10 months being our longest one. And so we would support the students to make contact with food industry or food producers, or in the human nutrition case, it could be from a research perspective or within hospitals working as a dietitian. And so there's certainly opportunities like that for students, kind of older students, I suppose, to get involved more practically and learn the skills then that they would be taking out into the workforce. And as I said, it's such a critical component of all of our programs, and actually it's one route that we see students take to careers. So a lot of our students will actually maybe go back as graduates to where they had done their work experience that was part of their undergraduate program. So it's a really great part of the programs.
Yeah, that sounds like wonderful exposure to different industries, and the fact that it circles back to employment as well is fantastic. So I think, you know, well done UCD for incorporating that as part of the course as well. A final thought here then. So if you were to give any advice for parents, and maybe summarise some of the key points that you mentioned about skills and development, what would that be?
So I'd encourage parents to kind of talk to their children about the types of career paths that exist. So I think naturally students will often think of, you know, I'm interested in science, or I'm interested in engineering, or I'm interested in medicine. But I suppose agriculture, food science, human nutrition, they're all essentially just applied elements of those sciences. And so looking at maybe food science instead of just doing straightforward undergraduate science, or if interested in engineering, maybe food engineering, or like that precision agriculture that we talked about, which you can look at the kind of agriculture systems technology side of things, or if it's the medicine and health, going the route of food science or human nutrition. And it's just the range of career opportunities that are possible out of that. It allows kind of time for the student to kind of build their understanding of the science and almost shape their own career path coming out of it as well. So I think they're just really nice opportunities where there's multiple things that a student can do afterwards.
Okay, that's fantastic advice. So obviously we're here on the University College Dublin campus, and it's fantastic. We saw a careers fair this morning for the eldest students here. Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about your programs. You have undergraduate programs at the moment. How many undergraduate programs do you have? What's the duration? You know, how many disciplines do they cover?
Brilliant. Well, we've essentially the food system, which I described to you. Our school is a little bit unusual in that a lot of other schools and colleges will split agriculture, food production, and then the food science, human nutrition side of it, and have them housed in separate schools. We bring them together because we see the importance of thinking about the end product and nutrition and health relative to the food production side of things. So we've programs essentially that take you from environmental sciences, which you might consider the kind of starting point, all the way through to the food science, human nutrition. In between that, we have agricultural sciences as a general agricultural science degree. We have animal science equine. We have food and agribusiness management. So bringing in for students, actually, it's a great program when they're kind of interested in science and business, because it combines the two with respect to agriculture and food production. And then I already mentioned that the food science and the human nutrition on the other end of it. Sustainable Food Systems is a brand new program, which actually takes elements of all of our programs combined into one, but really brings in that kind of underpinning with sustainability. And this has been really driven, I suppose, from conversations that we have with either graduates of our programs, of our existing programs, or with other colleagues in industry, where they're asking for these skill sets. Because again, this is such an emerging area, we need graduates that are now coming out of university with skills in that kind of sustainability area. For example, one of our graduates from a human nutrition program actually is now the head of sustainability for Kerry Group, one of the big international food ingredients companies. And I suppose chatting to her about this new program, she was really excited about it, because essentially she was saying she's in this role now, having come from human nutrition without that foundation in sustainability, and sees, I suppose, the growing need for skill sets, for that skill set, I suppose. So that's a really exciting, I think, program for any student. And again, it covers kind of quite a range of topics. So you could specialize in any one area along that whole food chain on the back of or coming out of the Sustainable Food Systems program.
Yeah, and you know, throughout the A to Z speaker series, the kind of interdisciplinary approach seems to be becoming more popular. And I think you've just highlighted, you know, why as well, you know?
And even, I mean, from a research perspective, that interdisciplinarity is hugely critical as well. I mean, any of my research is no good without understanding the food production and the food composition and everything else that goes alongside it. So we, even in academia, we're working together in the same way. And so I suppose as a result as well, the programs are kind of designed in that way to bring in all elements.
Yeah, of course. Listen, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I think we could talk all day, but we do appreciate you sharing your expertise with the ISP community. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Delighted, and thanks again for coming to visit.
No, I love being on the UCD campus, so thank you for the welcome. So visit ISP's website. All the A to Z speaker series content will be uploaded in a dedicated site for parents and students to access. The content is designed to empower you to have those meaningful conversations, to support students to reach their destinations of choice. The content for the A to Z speaker series, Feeding the Future, Growing a Sustainable and Healthy World, will be available on the A to Z website and supported by other content such as a podcast and all the resources that were mentioned in the interview today. Thank you.